Yeah, hi everyone. Welcome to a really brief presentation on brain parts and functions. So let's look at the first area, the cerebrum. It's the largest part of the brain and it controls most of the body's voluntary functions. It's covered by this thing called the cerebral cortex, and it can be broken down into things called lobes. The first lobe we'll look at is the frontal lobe, located at the front of the brain. It's primarily responsible for things like language, judgment and decision making. So really the higher executive mental function, if you will. The next lobe is the parietal lobe. And it really helps interpretation of senses of smell, touch and taste. The next lobe, the occipital lobe, is at the back of the brain, and it really maintains the visual processing center, or the visual cortex, for eyesight. The final lobe is the temporal lobe, and the temporal lobe contains the auditory cortex for hearing, but it also contains the hippocampus, which helps with long-term memory formation, and a word I can never pronounce correctly, the amygdala, which controls our anxiety levels, and that amygdala probably fires when I try and pronounce it. So let's split the brain in half so we can look at some components on the inside. So swing it over. The corpus callosum connects the left and right hemispheres. It sits under the cortex and helps with the communication between the two. The cerebellum is kind of like a separate structure. It controls balance, posture and coordination of skeletal muscles sitting at the base there. The medulla oblongata, it deals with involuntary functions such as breathing, heart rate and blood pressure, and the pons helps with breathing also and some eyesight control. The thalamus, it really serves as the operator, sending messages to other parts of the brain, and the hypothalamus, sitting below that, it's responsible for things like aggression, fear, sexual behavior, or in part anyway, and helps regulate temperature and water, appetite and thirst. Pituitary gland secretes hormones, and the brainstem finally helps transmit these messages to organs from the brain. So those last components are really the primitive, non-voluntary kind of areas of the brain, the lizard-like brain, if you will. So let me just take a breather and go over a little quick summary here if I can. The cerebrum, comprised of the lobes, the frontal lobe, the parietal lobe, the occipital lobe and the temporal lobe. So let me split in the middle as well and then fling this over so we can have a look. The corpus callosum, the cerebellum, the medulla oblongata, the pons, the thalamus and the hypothalamus, the pituitary gland and the brainstem. Wow, okay, well, thank you for watching the presentation. As I promised, a very rude and crude brain parts and functions presentation. Hope you enjoyed.